Hello and welcome to the Capital Call. Thanks for coming back this week. I'm Quinn Millegan.
And I'm Drew Millegan.
We're managing partners of the Woodworth Contrarian Fund here in beautiful McMinnville, Oregon. And it's right after the close on the 9th of May here. And we're actually off to a wedding here, our friend Logan. So congrats to Logan and Nova there.
Yeah, quite the power couple, too.
Oh, yeah.
Traveling up to Washington for that one.
And guys, stay tuned for the end of this podcast because I have some really interesting stories for you that Drew hasn't heard yet.
As per usual, I've been kept totally in the dark, as with many things in our lives. Please send help.
And that'll be This Day in Economic History, a segment that we've grown quite fond of. So wait till the end. I wanted to start off with an interesting tidbit. Spain had a large blackout about a week and a half ago, and there was actually an article where they took a $454 million economic hit from that event.
It takes quite a while for the economic estimates to really start rolling in from events like that. It's not surprising. I mean, you think about what it would happen to U.S. states if they had a blackout of that size. I mean, imagine the entire eastern seaboard just goes dark for a day.
Yeah.
It'd be huge, almost incalculable losses. Now, I was seeing a few satellite pictures of Spain being totally dark, and I have my suspicions that some of those were photoshopped. A lot of them turned out to be photoshopped.
Yeah.
But it's, still you got all these stories about, rail cars stopping in the middle of the nowhere on the high-speed lines and, people going out in the streets and enjoying the sunshine for a bit as nobody was able to go to work unless you were working in the power industry trying to fix it. So it's been not too big of a week besides, other than you did have the fighting breakout and is still going on in India between India and Pakistan. Luckily, it's not escalated or anything like that. But there's been additional trade talks between the UK and the US this week. Particularly, it looks like we kind of got a bit of a nothing burger deal with the UK, in my opinion. So taxes on some goods actually went up for the UK as a result of that deal.
Well, for the UK, not the US.
Yeah, the US, our tariff taxes actually went down. It's great for UK consumers. It's interesting that we've still got a 10% tariff on a country that we have a trade surplus with, given that the administration seems to view trade deficits as money transfers, which is quite strange from an economic perspective, but understandable. I mean, trade deficits, trade surpluses kind of need a brush up in terms of how they're marketed. Deficit makes it sound bad.
Well, I mean, to their credit, we can only hope that this all works out for the positive. I mean, and I take what any government says with a grain of salt, but it was interesting on Thursday, the 8th, yesterday, Howard Lutnick, the secretary, what is he, Secretary of Commerce?
One of those.
Whatever he is. He said that they'll roll out dozens of deals over the next month, and, they might have a template for smaller countries where they might slightly modify it for various things that countries they deem to be economically similar. But he did make a statement that they will achieve all deals by July 8th. I wonder if that'll actually happen.
Given that there's depending on how you count it, there's somewhere around 190 countries in the world. Given that we slapped on tariffs on every single one of those countries, including countries like Lesotho, which we have very, very little commerce with, if he were to do deals with every single country that we had tariffed between now and, you said June 8th, July 8th?
July 8th, yeah.
July 8th.
That's when the 90-day pause expires.
Okay, well, that's 2 months to do deals with about 190 countries. I mean, granted, you could do the deals with the big ones and maybe lump together a few of the smaller ones, but I mean, that's a deal a day. That's snap, 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 snap. So it'll be interesting to see if they keep up the pace. They're going to at least have to start with the big guys.
Yeah.
So I think they're doing Japan is one of the next ones. They were talking about reducing tariffs down to, Trump was quoted as saying 80% seemed like a good level.
No, that was with China.
Yeah, with China.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Japan. With China, apparently they're coming to a deal. They also mentioned India. Vietnam, though, made a statement that some of the demands they were making were just not feasible or reasonable.
Yeah, there's been a lot of reports coming out that the Trump administration is playing favorites with specific companies doing specific deals. Like, for example, I am aware of a report out of India that the Trump trade officials were pushing very hard for the Indians to fast track Starlink permitting, which is Elon Musk's satellite internet company. So,
Right.
again, this is one of the criticisms with tariffs is that it encourages a certain level of corruption.
But all remains to be seen. I do
Right.
like what the bond report guy, his statement that I repeated before, that it's not how I would have done it, not how you would have done it, but it's all about results in the end. So,
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, we're still looking. There is a not zero chance that the U.S. actually does have enough bargaining power that we can just bully other countries around into accepting what we want, which, could result in some net positive deals. And, there is actually another side to this argument. I basically just called that corruption, but there is actually a logical argument for treating specific large companies as kind of national champions. The national champion model of company is often used in Asia, for example, like Seoul has. South Korea has Samsung. Japan has companies like Mitsubishi. The Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. What a hell of a cyberpunk name.
Oh yeah.
So it's not uncommon to treat it like that. I just think in the long run you're going to make less money than if you just practice freer trade.
Sure, it remains to be seen in the long run, but the long run we're all dead.
Yeah.
And but I'm still not convinced that from an economic perspective, I'm not convinced the economic damage is necessarily worth it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Well, that's basically what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So what I think in the long term is it's kind of it's a mixed bag. What you could see is you've seen the immediate drop from the damage of the tariffs, just value wiped out instantly. There's no way around that. And you're seeing higher prices immediately as well. However, as you adapt to a new equilibrium, because there's plenty of countries out there that operate with fairly high trade barriers, what'll happen is you'll see a period of potentially stagnation before the economy begins to grow again. It'll just grow with those tariffs in place, which means that if there's ever an administration that comes on that removes a lot of those trade barriers, you would essentially see an immediate jump in production and productivity of the entire economy. So it's kind of a different philosophy. One could argue that from a certain perspective, you're okay with lower economic growth if it means that you're practicing, you're promoting U.S. production in this certain way. In some ways, just production in general has become somewhat of a global competition. You want to preserve your own manufacturing base, even if it would technically be more efficient in the long run to outsource. Different differences in production philosophy. The U.S. still punches far above its weight in terms of how much we produce relative to other countries. It's just that the rest of the world is caught up, and in many ways, our philosophy is kind of built around the idea of U.S. manufacturing supremacy. So the fact that other countries can't even compete at all is kind of fundamentally disturbing for many people. So, for example, like the worry is how this plays out is that even though it is more efficient to import a lot of items, if, say, we were to ever go to war with, God forbid, China, if we have outsourced a lot of our production capacity to them, there is a real concern that if you got into a war, that they would just outproduce the U.S. They would outscale us. We would not be able to project power in that situation, and you would lose your competitive advantage in that sense. And this matters in peacetime because the threat of going to war and the credible threat that you can actually beat someone in a war is in part what keeps people at peace to a degree.
Couldn't we pretty easily convert a lot of our more high-tech manufacturing into things that require inputs from international trade in time of war? I mean, wouldn't that be fairly straightforward?
What do you mean? Rephrase that.
Well, the fear is, okay, we go to war with China and suddenly we don't have the manufacturing capacity to make things that we're relying upon China for, right?
Yeah.
So, but couldn't we convert our existing manufacturing relatively simply in a time of war?
That's an argument to be made. I mean, one of the big national security concerns around, for example, car manufacturing specifically, is that car manufacturers historically have been the factories that have been retooled into like airplane manufacturing or tank production. Tank production was a huge thing in World War II, where a lot of the car manufacturers voluntarily retooled to produce those items. There was a period of several years where the U.S. basically produced no cars.
Yeah.
They were all using their pre-war stuff. And then after they switched back. So the concern is that if you don't have the right kind of production, you can't actually produce those items that you need. And in the future, it's not clear that tanks or airplanes are really going to be the deciding factor. As we've seen with Russia and Ukraine, they're pushing more and more towards drones.
Yeah.
And drone tech and drone swarms, effectively, just to overwhelm the enemy. And those are the
drone
kinds of
supremacy.
things. Drone supremacy. Those are the kinds of things that traditional anti-air can't really necessarily protect against, which is part of Russia's weakness in that war.
I saw that. I think Axon reported earnings, and they do drone technology in the United States. And one of the things is all of their capacity is built in the United States, which is interesting.
Which is, I mean, it's a strategic production capability. Huntington Ingalls, publicly traded company, HII, has actually talked extensively about their shift towards naval drone technology. So if, for example, instead of having one giant carrier ship, which the U.S. does have more than anybody else, you have a swarm of effectively drones in the water, and they're unmanned. Unmanned submersible vehicles, or what are they, UAVs? But the concern is that, I mean, on the flip side, though, like if you shift to, if you are the country of free trade, you can produce enough growth that the differences in production capacity, you'll basically innovate your way out of any problem, is the other thing. But then there's this concern that if you're in a community of many different countries that are at similar levels of innovation, there's a temptation to say, well, I think I can beat you in a fight. Effectively. It's kind of the argument as to why you go to war. And then the argument why free trade is actually better anyways is that if you are trading with each other, there's no incentive to go to war. Historically, the reason people went to war was to get access to resources. And this was because there was this economic philosophy in the beginning in pre-Adam Smith. Pre-economics, there was this idea that you basically just needed to hoard everything you needed. And whoever had the biggest pile of gold won.
Sounds like a pretty good winning pile to me.
Yeah, well, the problem is it's what led to colonialism and war and famines and all sorts of nasty stuff. We realize that by just trading with each other, you could also, the other thing is that when you go to war, this paradigm really only worked when you were dealing with economies that function on very basic agrarian economies. Once you start getting into more complicated supply chains, you're actually destroying more value than you're gaining oftentimes when you're conquering your neighbor.
Right. And you can only do that for so long.
Right. You can only keep it going so long. And then there's also the cost of whatever that country decides to do to the land it's just conquered, if it could even hold it. So it's more profitable in the long run with modern economics to just trade with the person. Then you get access to the resources in essentially the same way that you would if you had conquered them, except you haven't destroyed their industrial capacity.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win-win. It's why we haven't had wars after World War II. Well, not large wars. We've had fewer wars since the end of World War II because it's just gotten less and less. There are fewer situations where wars make sense.
Yeah. Well, there were a few topics I wanted to get to here. One of the things I was going to mention is Netflix. I thought was particularly interesting. They've been talking about this for a while, but the fact that, okay, let's say there is a recession, Netflix makes more money if you switch to their ad tier versus their paid tier.
I hate that.
So if you're saving money, you're cutting down on the subscriptions, and Netflix is likely to be one that you keep, A, because you can go to a cheap ad tier, but B, because they have a huge catalog. So they actually make more money in a recession.
Yeah, I hate that.
And this Monday was the last call for Skype after 22 years. And they were the big behemoth in the video call space. I think there was basically no competition until Microsoft bought them in around 2011, and then they slowly lost market share because they tried to switch people to Teams.
Okay, so you're telling me that there were still people making Skype calls as late as this year? That was a thing? It operated?
Yeah, Skype use actually spiked during the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
how did you even get access to it? Was there a download place, or was it?
I used Skype until like probably 2016.
Well, yeah, but the pandemic was in 2020. So what are you telling me here?
Well, you could still. Skype is still installed on my computer. It doesn't work anymore.
I thought Skype was peer-to-peer.
Well, it is. Yeah.
So couldn't you, in theory, still use it if two people have their own Skypes installed?
I'm not exactly sure how that. I don't think the network is truly peer-to-peer. It probably requires some server infrastructure.
Some sort of turn server, just so you have the directory.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised. So that would make sense.
But an icon, RIP.
R.I.P. Rest in peace.
Yeah.
Rest in rip.
I used to, in high school, I used to do like nightly Skype calls with some of my friends. Seb, if he's listening, will remember that.
Yeah, the late night Minecraft calls.
Boy. One of the other interesting earnings tidbit is that Disney shares popped after the House of Mouse reported better than expected earnings, but what was intriguing to me was a new Abu Dhabi theme park. And it'll be very interesting to see what they build because, it's not the 80s when they're building some of these, Disney World, Disneyland, whatever.
Right. Well, I mean, the theme parks have been really profitable for them. They've been great experience centers. I mean, regardless of what their portfolio does, it's almost like their portfolio of content just kind of feeds into additional experience-based content at their theme parks. They're constantly adding new rides and things like that based on new franchises. They've got like they've got the Marvel type stuff at their theme parks now.
The question is, did they ruin Star Wars?
Did they ruin Star Wars?
You let us know.
I mean, it's now got 3 trilogies to it, and the new movies aren't bad. It's just like, okay, I can tell you're doing this just for the IP. Like, I feel like they're not as iconic as they used to be.
I feel like people hate on them because they love the original so much, and they're okay. They're just like, I'm a fan of just more content for things I like. I don't care if it's not as good as the original. It's never going to be as good as the original.
You are the reason that no studio will take a risk on new content. This is the market dynamics of content and commissioning these types of films, because you're talking a decent film. You're easily going into the hundreds of millions of dollars for those budgets. And to take that kind of risk with a film, I've looked at the returns in that industry, and I actually was I don't remember if I looped you in on this conversation when I had it, but I think I was pitched as being part of a consortium that was going to invest in a film at one point.
Oh yeah, no, I remember that.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I'm not just hallucinating this, and it's such a high risk industry that, as far as I can tell, a lot of people are investing in these films literally just for the prestige to say that they're supporting the arts.
And it costs so much money to produce them. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, well, this is also why people churn out horror films at a dime a dozen. They're so cheap and easy to make, and you're usually making them with actors that, might not even be professional actors sometimes. So it's interesting is what I would say. But that's also why you've seen a shift towards more reiterating existing franchises and spin-offs and remasters and stuff like that, because it's very low risk. That there's a built-in audience, and there have been enough high-profile flops to discourage anybody from going through with the risk. Take, for example, actually Disney's animation studios are a good example of this. For those in the audience that remember hand-drawn animation that Disney used to put out pre-1990s, there was a film called Treasure Planet, which is a cult classic nowadays. It's absolutely gorgeous.
That's not the one with Monkey. No, that's Monkey Island. No.
Monkey Island was a different one.
Oh, okay.
There was also a video game. But I played a lot of film video games growing up, in case you can't tell. But Treasure Island was
I can tell.
A watershed moment for the Disney Animation Studio, because it was one of the last, if not, I think the last hand-drawn film they did before switching fully to 3D animation. Now, part of this was just down to the fact, a huge part of this was just down to the fact that 3D animation and animators are much cheaper. At the time of the switchover, I actually even believed that the hand-drawn animators were unionized and the 3D animators were not. But it was so high cost to go into the hand-drawn animation that when Treasure Island flopped, Disney essentially said, we're no longer doing hand-drawn animation. It's too large of a cost for too much risk. We're just going 3D from now on. And it seems to have worked out for them.
The CGI budgets, I mean, of course, they're cutting costs on it now, but I feel like CGI budgets have been absolutely massive.
They have, but it's been an inflation. It's been a case of, well, we can do more with less, and they don't actually cut the spending. They just wind up inflating what they can do with it, right? So, it's like you can make five guys can make 5 widgets, and then 5 guys can make 10 widgets, and you're not suddenly still just making 5 widgets anymore. You're now making 10 widgets every time.
Yeah.
With the same amount of labor. That's how productivity increases work. That's effectively how that's worked in the 3D animation industry too, to the best of my knowledge. But it's just very, very hard to get hand-drawn animation done anymore.
That it makes me think. You're pointing out that a lot of films have been nostalgia films. Remakes, that kind of thing. But we've also seen this. I don't know if this is novel, or but we've also seen a rebirth of a lot of nostalgic vehicles. So there's other industries. We're doing a lot of very risk-off nostalgia takes, just to milk things for profit.
Well, to be fair, once you have an established industry, it's again simply a better business model.
Yeah,
it's you have a built-in audience that is low risk that will spend on it, even if it's crap. So it's safe. Yeah. It makes sense that you'd be reinvesting in it. The fact that we get new novel items made, creative works made at all is quite frankly quite interesting.
And I think the environment of entrepreneurship in America does breed some of this novel type of innovation.
Well, this is also a part of the reason why American culture I think just culturally America is much more willing to allow failure to happen. I mean, you go some places you can't even go bankrupt without a whole bunch of exceptions. And there are exceptions in the U.S. as well, but
there's a reason we don't have debtor's prison. Like it's a good thing to allow debt and to allow the release of debt in the case of bankruptcy.
Well, this is also the case, I think, with equities markets in general as well. And by equities, I mean equity ownership in the business, where you're right there alongside with the owner saying, like, hey, if you make it, we're all going to make it. What a debtor said, but if you lose, you're going to lose everything. So it's an inherently higher risk, higher return proposition. I know from my limited dealings with Europe is that they're typically much more debt focused. The equity markets there are much shallower. Typically, investors like to see a little bit more security to their investments, which means that if the business fails, not only do they have less access to capital in the first place to come up with creative ideas, because Europeans are just as creative, but they just don't have as many resources knocking around to let them do creative things. And when those businesses do fail, the debtors, it can get very nasty with a lot of debt holders versus equity holders. They'll just seize everything. And there's a little bit of creative destruction that happens there, but the consequences are a lot worse if you fail in a country that's more debt-based financing versus equity-based financing. They need people like us, essentially taking the risk alongside with them on the bet that they're going to make some sort of outsized return on the back end.
Yeah. Speaking of risk-taking in American culture, there was one interesting thing that I've been following that's been developing. I don't know if you saw, but there's been this reporting on young bankers in America where they've been taking junior associates to the absolute edge.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Reported like 110-hour work weeks for the junior associates. And there's a couple people that died. And the junior bankers that...
What was it, kidney failure? I think I saw kidney failure in there, which to me implies that they're A, not sleeping, and B, ingesting way too much caffeine.
Well, this one, so junior bankers at Robert W. Baird say that long hours weren't unusual for their industrial teams. They were working until 4 a.m. for weeks, and then they were called together for a pizza party where one of them died, and apparently it had something to do with I don't know if it was drug related, just excess, basically.
I mean, with these guys, live fast, die young.
Yeah, I mean, they
It's
were
kind of the motto.
they were assigned 20-hour work days.
4 hours of sleep is not unusual in our industry. I know during the week, even I don't really sleep that much. I mean, you're talking maximum 6 hours of sleep usually for me.
Yeah.
And then I try to catch up at weekends, and it just doesn't work.
Another employee raised concerns to human resources about consistent 20-hour work days, and a week later, he was diagnosed with failed pancreas after collapsing at home from exhaustion and organ failure. And then not long after the second visit to the ER, the banker was fired because of poor productivity.
You know what I think was he was fired for poor productivity?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That is just horrendous. Of course, I'm sure people don't really have as much sympathy for it. And even if you read that article, because I read that same article you're looking at, they interviewed the other bankers at other firms, and they actually did confirm that those working conditions were not unusual, kind of dismissed it to a degree.
Yeah, it's kind of like hazing. They treat the new analyst like they're freshmen in a frat or something.
Yeah, basically, which is not really surprising. I mean, that's pretty much what I would expect at some of those firms. And they're not. I mean, there was that one case where the brokers went on strike that I'm aware of, which was nuts. Brokers going on strike. You have to have really bad working conditions for that to happen. I find it interesting, though. You don't really exactly see an outpouring of sympathy for these guys because they're often working in professions where you're expected to way out earn other people. So people are kind of looking at this and they're like, well, they're getting compensated for destroying their bodies. So, it's not like a machinist is working himself to the bone for minimum wage here.
It's an industry that takes a lot of risk. So, it makes sense that, that kind of, you're maximizing your productivity.
It's certainly not for everybody.
No.
You kind of need those guys to exist for the U.S. to work, but it's like, ugh. Like, guys, there's a certain number of hours at which you start losing productivity. It's not really worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen actual experiments on productivity, and it's one of those things where, again, if you've got 5 guys making 5 widgets, and then you have those same 5 guys suddenly making 10 widgets, it's not like you're going to give those guys time off. They're just going to be making 10 widgets with the same amount of time and labor. And that happens in the finance industry where even though you can get more productivity out per worker by having them work less, the temptation is just to work them as much as possible. Because they the idea is that at any time not spent working is time wasted anyway. So why not just work them to the bone? And I think there's some fairly fundamental flaws with that line of thinking. I think you can actually do more with less. That seems like that would be the point past a certain point. I'm aware of certain studies on motivation, for instance, where past a certain level of wages and a certain level of living, you're kind of not really getting additional motivation out of your individual employees. This kind of research goes back decades.
Yeah.
Once you get up in these really high end salaries, top of the 1%, every additional dollar is getting you you're getting much less for your additional marginal dollars, which is why people fall back on pizza parties like that, because you have to find other sources of intrinsic motivation to keep your employees going.
Yeah.
So,
well, if you're already paying someone $1 million a year, what's $1 million to?
Right. At that point, the guy's just going to say, well, okay, I'll just have another zero in my bank account. What does this even mean?
Yeah.
You need to give them equity. You need to give them something, prestige, a title change.
Now, speaking of title changes, great segue. I wanted to bring up the man, the myth, the legend, Warren Buffett.
The Buffett?
Yeah. Berkshire Hathaway had their famous annual meeting, although it was not
a phenomenon.
Yeah, it was not the same without Charlie Munger, rest his soul. And but what Warren announced, and I think he's 94, is that he is choosing Greg Abel to succeed him at the end of the year. And it's worth noting that Warren's total return at Berkshire that he has generated was 5.5 million%. That's insane.
That is that if you had a leaderboard of total relative performance added at a company, I think at least without introducing weird sampling effects of very, very small companies that you took it from $1 to $5,000 and suddenly you've done like 5,000% returns. But like that's got to be an all-time performance, top all-time performer.
And it's worth noting he's a value investor. That's what we do. You know, you look for aggressive returns where nobody else wants to look. Now that is since 1965, 5.5 million %. And you know, he's made statements that Tim Cook made Berkshire more money than Warren did because of their investment in Apple.
What I find crazy about that investment in particular is that it started to represent a larger and larger and larger proportion of Berkshire's portfolio as time went on, and he effectively just never sold.
Yeah,
because he just continued to believe there was just more value in there, and he was right.
Yeah, I mean, part of his investment philosophy was basically, you know, he made multiple statements where it's like, I invest in a company. He doesn't even listen to the earnings calls most of the time. He just looks at the balance sheet and the state of the company, and he wants to buy it at a good price.
Yep.
And doesn't care what happens. You know, the stock market could shut down for 10 years, and he would be fine.
And I mean, it's essentially our same philosophy, except he just has more staying power.
Yeah.
And he's even longer term looking than us.
It's worth noting. And also they got to a certain size where their actual deal flow slowed down because you get so large that you're limited in what you can actually do. I mean, it's not the cool, you know, like the Amex salad dressing scandal of whatever that was way back. But today he actually they did disclose that 9.3, not today, but recently, 9.3% of the Berkshire portfolio is in Japan trading houses. And one thing that's interesting to note about that is that now more than 1/3 of the Japanese stock market is held by foreigners. And so the Japanese government is trying to make stocks more accessible by lowering the minimums, that kind of thing, trying to encourage local investment in stocks.
You have to have a certain minimum to invest in Japan?
I'm not 100% sure how it works, but it's much more restrictive than our stock market.
This is why when you open up the market, you unlock multipliers on your value. Like, why would you restrict stock investing like that? Like, we have accreditation requirements here, but any Joe Blow can just invest in options if they really want to.
Yeah, I'm not sure you should, but
technically, for a long time, there were actually supposed to be restrictions on whether individuals could trade options and outfits like what was it, Interactive Brokers, or was it Robinhood? Essentially,
they broke regulations. They were just literally breaking the law until they got so large that they could just pay the fine.
Yeah, the good old Uber strategy: just break the law until you win, and then you can afford to pay the fines. It's fantastic if you can make it work.
Yeah, it really, you know, the more power to them, right?
I don't know if that's something we should be celebrating. I mean, granted, I don't like the taxi medallion industry as it stood before. I could complain about that. There's still industries that function like that. I could actually get into it, but I mean, like, you know, you remember taxi medallions?
I mean, I am aware.
You're aware that they existed?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the unfortunate thing about taxi medallions is it's essentially a license is that the taxi cab companies and taxi drivers themselves will cause the limitation, right? So they restrict it. They get higher fares because there are fewer taxis, and they function effectively as a cartel pushing up prices. The consumer doesn't win out in this situation, but oftentimes lobbying in favor of the taxi medallions or like they might use like a safety argument, like, oh, we have to train these guys, otherwise it could be anybody. And we of course know how that story ended, is that Uber came in and just said, hey, these guys are just sharing their cars on the weekends. They're not taxi drivers. They're not even professionals. Got away with that until the point where there were literal suicides from taxi drivers, by the way, over the loss of value in these medallions as a result of Uber. Like, taxi drivers would literally spend their life savings to acquire these taxi cab medallions and get loans to buy these taxi cab medallions on the assumption that it would be there it would be their livelihood, it would be their retirement, it was everything. So when those taxi cab medallions all dropped in value, it caused a lot of issues in the taxi cab market. There was a reason why taxi cabs hated these guys. And
there's a great Nathan For You episode about trying to save the taxi cab business. Drew doesn't like that show. I think it's hilarious.
I can't stand it. That guy is just, it's one of those things where I I can't. He's intentionally being kind of cringe for humor.
But somehow it's somewhat like they explore business ideas, and it's just really ridiculous. Somehow,
Dumb Starbucks.
yeah, somehow it's informative in a way of business psychology.
Yeah, somehow it is, and I just don't like it. I just can't. The guy's doing intentionally bad ideas, and sometimes they work, which is, I guess, kind of funny.
Yeah.
But there are other industries that still function like that, that they have the artificial licensing. Even like plumbers in certain states, sometimes the electricians and plumbers will have like artificially restricted licenses so that they can earn, so that they can pump up their wages. Again, that higher wage comes at the price of extracting value from the people consuming that particular product. This is why we also have a shortage of elevators in the U.S. The elevator unions push for certain elevator maintenance and regulations, such that only specific companies can do the job,
and they limit the actual amount of people that can be journeymen
in the elevator repair union.
It's not for lack of people wanting to be journeyman elevator people. It's not for lack of demand for elevators.
Right. It's this idea that in order to get higher wages, you need to basically extract that value out of the total market, and force everybody else to pay more for their right to exist, which does have some, there's an argument kind of for that in some cases. Like, prices are too low anyways, and these people can't make a living off this, so we should keep the wages a little bit artificially high. But the temptation to just go a little bit further is I think too high. Like the mob still basically controls the longshoremen's unions. Maybe I'll get whacked for this, but I just know that that's a big reason why U.S. ports haven't been automated. It's literally the longshoremen's union lobbies the government constantly to require that they keep employing longshoremen, despite the fact that I think something like half the people in the longshoremen's union aren't even like active longshoremen. They're basically inherited positions.
I don't know. I'm always in favor of free market dynamics, and it's like they restricted doctors for a decade or two, and now we don't have enough doctors.
Yeah, we're still paying for that. There was a moratorium on the number of doctors the number of residency positions that were open at hospitals. And this doesn't really surprise me at all. Doctors are notoriously bad at anything to do with business. They're very smart, very capable usually, but anything to do with a dollar cost or optimization of emergent systems is just beyond them.
And this is a part of a psychological thing, because as a doctor, you're not in the business of making risks that have a high chance of failure, because failure in a doctor's case can be death.
Right. It's totally understandable. Yeah, and not all doctors are bad businessmen, by the way. It's just that it's an average, I think.
Right. But it's a much different kind of risk. So when you're trained in that idea of how you should take risks that might have life-changing implications versus, as a trader, in order to make money, you only have to be right 51% of the time.
Right.
If you're right 51% of the time as a doctor, I don't want that doctor.
Right. You're basically killing people on a coin flip in that case. So it makes total sense why the skills that go with a certain level of business acumen are totally different from the skills that go with being a professional with somebody's lives in your hands. And you want those two people to be different. This is also why you have different business administrators oftentimes for hospitals, although some people don't like that they exist at all. These restrictions, I have seen counter models to this, by the way. For example, it seems like Europe, for instance, actually has a little bit less toxic of a union culture. Oftentimes you'll see, especially with like infrastructure work in the European Union, they're actually quite low cost, despite having relatively healthy benefits for their employees. And part of what the unions over there do different than unions over here is they don't treat work as though it's a limited resource. They frequently, the unions there exist to negotiate contracts, yes, but they also do a fair amount of reinvestment in the skills and efficiencies of the industries in which they operate. So there's a very much like a cooperative handshake that goes on in the industries with the union, with a lot of those unions over there, which just doesn't happen over here. Over here, if you try to introduce an efficiency like automation, there's oftentimes kind of a I wouldn't say Luddite, but there's like a very suspicious response to any sort of automation or like tools that make the job a little bit easier or more cost effective, because unions are first and foremost concerned about securing good paying jobs for their members. They don't always see the association between increased productivity and increased work.
Yeah.
Because again, those 5 guys could be producing 10 widgets instead of 5.
Yeah.
You don't just have to mandate that those 5 guys always produce 5 widgets, and you cannot change the method of production.
I keep thinking of Five Guys at the restaurant every time you say that.
Hey, I mean, 5 guys, they got great fries.
So I'm told.
Yeah. It's not been this week has not been totally non-eventful. There has been a lot of stuff going on. The Pope, we didn't talk about it.
Oh.
We have a new Pope.
Habemus Popum.
We've got the new Pope from the Midwest. Chicago native, first American Pope, and the first thing he did upon entering office, so to speak, was criticize the vice president. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, well, no, I think he did that before. Did he? Because I know he tweeted at him saying he was wrong about something, or so, I don't know.
Something to do with, I don't know, immigration or something like that.
But he did the mass for the first time. He spoke a bit of it in English.
Yeah,
and his brother has denied the reports that he's a Cubs fan. He's a White Sox fan.
Well, of course he's a White Sox fan. The White Sox need divine intervention.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
It's only fair. They keep talking about adding baseball here in Portland, but I don't think they'll get the funding for it.
No. They approved the $400 million bond.
They approved the bond contingent on them actually being able to build the sucker. So they've approved the ability to issue the bonds. Now they need someone actually backing. This is big news in Portland, by the way, for anybody not aware. Is that it's like they've been pushing for this for years. We've got the Portland Pickles, which are a minor league team, which I think is fun because they play against like other towns I'm aware of. But we've got a group, the Portland Diamond Project, that has been pushing Major League Baseball. And Major League Baseball has been talking about expansion, but it's between us and like Salt Lake City. For the expansion, there's only, I think, 1 slot for it. And I would love baseball to be here. They're projecting, they're suggesting putting it in the South Waterfront, which is a kind of dense neighborhood south of the Portland downtown area that's very well served by rail.
I thought they were putting it across the river on the east side.
No. It would be in the former Zidell shipping.
Gotcha.
Former Zidell shipbreaking, not shipbreaking, but shipbuilding sloop.
So a new MLB team, potentially.
New MLB team, potentially. And they needed, what the state legislature did is they approved the ability to issue these bonds based on player salaries, not that they actually approved it. So this was a step that needed to happen, but doesn't actually cost anything unless the MLB project can come up with the funding to build the sucker. And as far as I can tell, I think they have a heck of an uphill battle. I think that's a great location for it. It would be about as well connected as Providence Park is for our soccer teams. Go Timbers, go Thorns. But it's not looking particularly optimistic because Salt Lake City already has like a major benefactor pulling for that stadium. So the idea that Portland might get a stadium is almost a stalking horse for Salt Lake City.
Yeah. So I think it's about time that I bring up this day in economic history. And
drum roll, please.
Yeah, I've got a couple interesting ones. I did print them out this time. I went back in time. Last time I had it digital. But, honorable mention. And this was not that long ago. But, so today is May 9th, 2025, when we're recording this after the close. 5 years ago, May 9th, 2020, was when the unemployment rate in the U.S. hit 14.7%.
Oh, wow.
The highest since the Great Depression, at 20.5 million people out of work. The hospitality, leisure, and healthcare industries taking the greatest hits overall, affecting essential workers and people with lower income.
The U.S. has had a remarkably low unemployment rate for such a long time. I mean, I'm aware of entire countries that have unemployment rates of like 1 out of 4 people out of work just constantly. Spain comes to mind.
Yeah.
And we just don't have that here.
And so the story that I have for you, and this is a little bit of a lengthy one, so bear with me. but I found a couple of items that were actually intertwined, and this led up to the year is 1901.
What a year.
Yeah, so
Cowboys were still around.
this is the biggest short squeeze of the last century. An epic stock market battle took place again in 1901. Two heavyweights fought for control of a railroad, cornered the market, and forced the biggest short squeeze of the last century.
This was back when you could still do just straight up things that would be straight up market manipulation today, very obviously so, or like printing shares to try and undo their comparative majority and stuff like that. And
Yeah. So the Union Pacific was a railroad nobody wanted to touch, not even J.P. Morgan in 1898. It was mired in bankruptcy, receivership in the hands of the government, but Edward Henry Harriman saw an opportunity. Through a syndicate of backers, the Vanderbilts, Rockefellers, Goulds, Amices, and Kuhn and Loeb & Co., Harriman took control of the road. In total, they paid $75 million for 1,800 miles of railroad and got every penny back in profits within 3 years.
oh,
Harriman recognized that expansion through acquisition was the most efficient way to lower costs and ensure profitability for Union Pacific. He quickly bought up competing railroads until Union Pacific dominated the U.S. west of Omaha. Harriman needed to expand east, so he set his sights on a key acquisition. Chicago was the railroad hub of the country. Anyone moving people or products by rail from east to west or vice versa had to go through Chicago. The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad was a critical piece in controlling that movement. So buying the Burlington Railroad would make the Union Pacific the strongest railroad in the country.
undoubtedly.
Yeah. James Hill had similar ideas. Hill, with the backing of J.P. Morgan, controlled the Northern Pacific Railroad. The Northern Pacific did a great deal of business moving cotton from the south to Seattle to be shipped off to Asian markets. Acquiring the Burlington Railroad would make the Northern Pacific the dominant railroad in the country. Charles Perkin was president of the Burlington Railroad and was closing in on retirement. A sale was imminent, Drew. So the first battle of Harriman and Hill was fought over the Burlington. And Harriman bid first, right? Perkins set the going rate for Burlington at $200 a share in cash. Harriman countered at $150 a share in cash or $200 a share in Union Pacific bonds. Perkins turned him down. Unrelenting, Harriman began buying Burlington stock in the open market. At the same time, Hill proposed a Burlington merger with Northern Pacific, was told the price, and also began buying shares in the open market. Eventually, Perkins chose Hill over Harriman. The backing of Morgan helped, but Perkins believed Hill offered a better home for Burlington. And there was a delicate balance of power in the railway world. The acquisition of the Burlington by Hill would smash it and give him the dominant influence. That was repugnant to Harriman temperamentally and alarming to his associates financially. They went to Hill. They expressed their views and amiably added that, quote, paid a damn fool price for Burlington, end quote. As one of them put it, they were willing to participate so that everybody could be satisfied and the status quo maintained. They desired peace. Even at $200 a share for Burlington stock, war would mean millions of waste. Harriman said nothing more to Hill, but his associates, he showed how Hill could be defeated by the purchase of the controlling interest in the Northern Pacific. That was cheaper and easier than to buy equal interest in Burlington. So Hill and Morgan never fully controlled Northern Pacific. Collectively, they only held about 23% interest in the company. They believed that nobody would attempt to seize control of a $155 million railroad through the market.
They believed it was too expensive, huh?
Right. And it's important to understand the mood of the time. Ordinary investors had recently been worked into a frenzy as U.S. Steel shares were promoted, railroad stocks were rising fast, and various rumors of insider accumulations and mergers. Lefebvre recounts a raging public speculation in stocks, while Clues talks of restless sea of reckless stock speculation that swept the American people into its vortex with all its razzle-dazzle extravagance.
Razzle-dazzle.
And that's a quote. In this hyped-up environment, Harriman's attempt to retaliate against Morgan for grabbing the Burlington acted like a spark igniting a pool of gasoline. The resulting jump in prices, then panic, caused intense excitement, demoralization, and confusion that convulsed the stock market in a way that alarmed moneylenders, destroyed confidence, and caused a general rush to sell stocks, which brought down with a crash involving many thousands in ruinous losses. From May to
Good
April,
old panics.
from May to April 1901, Harriman quietly bought a majority of Northern Pacific preferred and $37 million in common stock, $80 million total. He was 40,000 common shares short of majority control. Hill, suspecting something was up, confronted Jacob Schiff in the Kuhn and Loeb & Co. offices, who admitted everything. Hill was furious, but he had a problem. He needed Morgan's approval before he could fend off Harriman. But Morgan was vacationing in France.
As one does.
A telegram,
in 1901.
Exactly. A telegram was sent, and he waited. Meanwhile, Harriman placed the order for the final 40,000 shares of Northern Pacific to be bought on May 4th, a Saturday trading session. Only the order was...
Saturday trading session. They used to have those?
Yeah. Only the order was never filled. A junior partner at Kuhn, Loeb & Co. bungled it. Jacob Schiff found out, but also ignored it. Morgan's telegram reply finally reached Hill in the evening of Sunday, May 5th. On Monday, May 6th, the mad scramble began.
They all rushed in.
Hill and his backers quickly bought up 200,000 shares in Northern Pacific that day. Its stock price rose from $110 to $130 in the buying spree. Later that day, Harriman found out his 40,000 share order never went through. Neither side held a majority. Feeling the price rise was unwarranted, traders began shorting Northern Pacific stock. And basically, when you short a stock, you're betting that the price will fall. And to profit, you need to borrow shares, sell them at the market price, then buy the shares back at a lower price. And then with the shares back in your possession, you return the borrowed shares to the lender.
At a profit.
Yeah. And it's done for a fee. So your profit's the difference between the money you collected and sold minus the cost to borrow.
Yeah.
So on Tuesday, May 7th, Northern Pacific shares were bid up to $150. Short sellers in the stock started feeling the pressure. They could dump other holdings to cover their losses or close out their short positions at a big loss. Now here's the thing. By Wednesday afternoon, the decision was made for them. The market was off by 20 points, yet Northern Pacific stock rose to $200.
Yeah.
The squeeze was on.
Doubled.
That night, brokers crowded into the Waldorf Hotel and filled the air with tobacco smoke and rumor. Broker Bernard Baruch observed the scene, quote, "One look inside the Waldorf that night was enough to bring home the truth of how little we differ from animals after all." From a palace, the Waldorf had been transformed into the den of frightened men at bay.
Oh, wow.
Unbeknownst to Harriman, Hill seized enough shares for control the day before, yet neither party was willing to sell. It became obvious on Thursday that more shares were sold short than could be bought back in the market.
Oh, wow.
Northern Pacific rose quickly as short sellers rushed frantically to cover their positions, except no shares were available. Harriman and Hill had cornered the market. The stock price was bid up $300, $500, $800, and then finally...
And they wouldn't sell.
And finally, $1,000 a share. The deadline to deliver shorted shares was 2:15 p.m. Thursday, which was May 9th, 1901.
Oh, wow.
And short sellers dumped everything as their Pacific Northern losses grew. It set off a market-wide panic. Margin loan rates spiked up to 60%, compounding the selling. And realizing the worst, Morgan and Harriman called a truce and devised a plan. The major houses, J.P. Morgan, Kuhn, Loeb & Co., and others, announced they would not force delivery at the deadline, and Northern Pacific sold off. Now, the short sellers in Northern Pacific got a lucky break. They were allowed to close their short positions at $160 a share.
That would not happen today. I mean, I guess this is basically the equivalent, the historic equivalent of the GameStop short that happened. If anybody remembers what happened there, where more than 100% of the outstanding float was sold short, by the way, which shouldn't be possible, but it
seems
is.
Strange.
And it's basically the equivalent of that short squeeze happening where it went from like $40 to $500, except that happening with Apple or Google. Like a short like that happening with like Google or Facebook or something like that, that would have system-wide contagion effects. So that it's understandable that a short squeeze of that magnitude could potentially bring the entire market down with it.
And here's the thing, Drew. It gets even more interesting. I found another tidbit from this that was a result of it. And by the way, Warren Buffett has known, when he set up their office in 1962, he put 7 items on the wall, including photocopies of newspaper pages from financial history, including this a case of what happened in May 1901 with Northern Pacific. But the combined efforts, catastrophe, as it were, caused unintended chaos in the entire market. Many less sophisticated investors lost everything through the panic. And one of
It's like the South Sea bubble.
one of those victims was Bolton. He was actually... Oh, I lost my paper.
Well, Isaac Newton himself lost his shirt in the South Sea bubble back in the day. You know what the South Sea bubble is?
What's that?
We can discuss it a different time.
We'll talk about it next call.
We'll talk about it next call.
I brought up this chart for those who are watching. This is Northern Pacific stock, and this is what happened all the way up to 1,000.
And then it declined back to normal.
But there's this guy, Samuel Bolton Jr., the Troy brewer, believed to have killed himself. This is the next day, said to have lost in stocks. He died in a vat of hot beer.
You jumped into beer?
Yeah. So, Troy, New York, May 9th, 1901, the body of Samuel Bolton Jr., a prominent brewer and businessman of the city, was found today in a vat of hot beer. Mr. Bolton had but a short time before returned from the pleasure drive and chatted pleasantly with friends. About noon, his hat was seen beside the vat of boiling beer. An investigation brought to light his body in the steaming liquid. Doctors were called, who gave their belief that death was instantaneous.
That's just the doctors being nice. That's the doctors trying to reassure the family. You jump into a boiling vat, you're feeling every bit of that for at least a second. So what a terrible way to die.
His family made all this money from brewing, and he I guess he lost everything on the Northern Pacific trade, and then decided to kill himself in a vat full of boiling beer.
This is why we have risk metrics, to prevent dumb things like this. You could be right and still. What's weird is that if you look at that, bring the chart back up again. If you look at this chart, the shorts were right. Look at that. It was way overvalued, and it did indeed go down in value. It just didn't happen as fast as they anticipated.
Yeah.
What's the time period on it? What's the time scale?
This goes till 1969.
So these are 5-year increments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they would have just had like somebody shortened up at 140.
Well, and this is adjusted for splits, I believe. So it's not exactly, the pricing is not accurate for the time, but
what the thing about shorts, and the reason that you can't overextend yourself like this, there's a very good lesson here, is that short downside is unlimited. I mean, you saw that spike there. What'll happen is that you'll sell short at 200 and the stock will go to 500, and you've lost all of your principal plus another $100.
I don't think people realize how dangerous it is to short a company because they think it's going to go bankrupt, like GameStop, because something happens and suddenly it's through the roof.
Wall Street can resurrect companies from the dead. You do some creative financing, a refi, or even a buyout. It can be very. There's a reason why when we do shorts, we are very risk off. And we only do a very small proportion of the portfolio if we do shorts, which we're actually not even short right now.
We short names that we just think are overvalued, not that we think are going out of business or that we hate or something, just something that is trading at a higher price, an overinflated price relative to its intrinsic value.
Or even its growth rate. There's oftentimes, ideally we want a perfect storm where the company is just, it's hyped on something dumb. It's way overvalued. It's higher than even like optimistic growth rates. The company basically has to be Superman just to jog in place. That's the kind of company that we look to short.
Yeah. Nothing that's going to leave us jumping into a boiling vat of beer.
It wouldn't even taste good. It's not done. What a terrible way to go.
I'm just imagining, I know they said they found his hat and watch and pocketbook by the side, but I'm just imagining that they just find a vat of beer with a little top hat floating at the top.
Oh, that's so morbid. Why would you even? I mean, it's comical in a way, in a dark gallows humor sort of way. I'd rather drown in regular beer. Like, you couldn't have found a vat of regular beer and just dove in and been like, gulp, I guess I'm dead. Like, I guess drowning is unpleasant, but boiling,
Yeah,
I guess it burns off the
really
nerve endings.
unpleasant.
I guess if somebody's in that state, they're not necessarily thinking logically anyways. So,
Yeah.
and on that terrible note,
This has been the Capital Call. I'm Quinn Milligan,
and I'm Drew Milligan.
and we'll see you next week, every Monday morning at 2 a.m. Pacific, 5 a.m. Eastern, potentially just in time for your morning commute. So
we go.
stay liquid, my friends.